Hey there, YouTubers. Different kind of video today. I'm doing something that probably doesn't really need these props that are in front of me, but I wanted to do an introductory video. I've never done that, and I've never really kind of explained too much of my philosophy on prepping and why, and I wanted to kind of go through that. Let me start off by saying that I'm going to do some reading here. I have outlines. I'm going to try to stick to it. There's a lot of information I wanted to get across, so forgive me if I'm doing some reading. First of all, why prep? What it comes down to is disasters are going to happen. It's not a matter of if they're going to happen. It's a matter of when they're going to happen. And they can happen on a terrible scale, or they can happen on a fairly modest scale. And it's up to you to kind of ramp up or ramp down and meet the challenge that you're having that particular day. But it's going to happen. Now, there's the really common disasters, if you will. That's the tornadoes, that's the hurricanes. Right now in Colorado, there are terrible, terrible forest fires that are just tearing the state up. That's a pretty good example of a relatively common disaster scenario where being prepared is really going to assist you. Now, after that, you can end up into some things that are just much less common, but they're still out there. Train derailments, a boil order. Madison, Wisconsin was on a boil order for an extended period of time because they had an infestation in the water. And I mean, it's kind of a long story. It was Cryptosporidium. But that being said, everybody went on bottled water or boiling water for an extended period of time. And were they prepared for that? Civil unrest, war, these are things that can really disrupt daily life. And then less things, famine, economic collapse, EMP, zombie apocalypse. You can kind of quickly veer off into some nutbaggery, but there are things out there, the natural disasters. These are things that are really pretty likely. Now, that's not to say that it's going to happen right next to you, but it could, and that's why you should be prepared. It's kind of the second reason to prep, is because you're nobody's victim. I mean, if it's just not acceptable to put yourself in a scenario where you have to rely on other people or the government or anyone else when you've been given notice, you've presumably been given means. It's your responsibility as an adult, as a parent, as a spouse, as a citizen, frankly, to be prepared and to not become a burden on others when something terrible does happen. And then we have lots of people that are perfectly comfortable being a burden on others, and that's wrong. Lastly is just simplicity. There is no reason not to be prepared. You have 80% of the things that you need to be prepared already in your home. You already have them. It's a matter of thinking about it, putting them together, and having a plan for using them should the scenario or the need arise. And that's it. You're already there. It's just the difference between being able to execute a plan and not. Question was asked of me, what should I start with? And I give a strange answer. You should start with time. And what I mean by that is, how much time are you planning to be prepared for? Right now, FEMA and the various government agencies recommend 72 hours. You should be prepared for a complete service interruption of 72 hours. Now that means water, food, shelter potentially, whatever it is, 72 hours. Now, part of the reason for that is FEMA likes to say that they could be anywhere helping assist people within 72 hours of a disaster striking. Now, we know that's not exactly true, but that's kind of some of the thinking behind that. 72 hours is a good number. If you have only done 72 hours, you are better than probably 80% of the population. I don't particularly like that number. I think it should be longer than that. I have chosen 2 weeks as my number. I'm prepared to be completely self-sufficient for 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks is a good number that somebody can attain relatively quickly without a big disruption in lifestyle, and it's something that can be maintained with stock rotation and things like that over an extended period of time. And if something major were to happen, 2 weeks, frankly, if you had something where there was a complete interruption for 2 weeks, what's much more likely is a partial interruption. So that 2 weeks of complete interruption becomes a month of supplemental needs during what becomes a partial service interruption. But at some point in the future, I'd like to take mine out to 2 months. I think 2 months is a pretty good number, but 2 weeks is great. Even 72 hours is good, or good enough, if that's all that you're doing. The trick is to have a plan. Water. Again, with water, they say a gallon a person a day. It's probably more like 3, given that you have to bathe and you have to do other things. Probably food for cooking, for example. But it's all based on your time. If you're going to be 72 hours of complete service interruption, then you should have 72 hours worth of water, and make sure probably then double that. And I'll be real upfront, I don't have 2 weeks worth of water, but I have the ability to make clean water. So you don't necessarily have to have the commodity that you think you're going to need. You just have to have a plan for acquiring it should you need to, and hope that your plan is sufficient. Because if it isn't, you're in trouble. So you have to have some level of confidence that what you're doing is going to be enough. Food, again, it's equal to the time that you're preparing for. Chances are, whatever you think you need, you probably don't need that much. Many of us are overfed, including myself. And we can survive a very long time on a very modest diet. However, that being said, the one thing I'll be real upfront on is food is comforting. So if you think you might be in your basement, and I'm just picking a scenario, if you think you might be in your basement for a few days and your kids are going to be there, maybe having a little food and food prep and things to go on to keep them entertained or keep them motivated is a good thing. So you can skimp on food. Water is more important than food, but at least be aware that there are other aspects of food beyond just strict nutrition. Shelter. Shelter is something that's very personal. It's really going to depend on where you live and your personal situation. If you're on the 50th floor of an apartment building, you'd better be mobile. You really need to be able to move and move quickly and not draw attention to yourself. I'm not exactly out in the country. I'm in more of a suburban setting, but I am as close to you as you can get to being in the country and still being in a suburb. My plan is to shelter in place. Now, that being said, that's what I've developed everything around. You should still be able to get out and shelter out of your home if you need to. And I'll give you a great example of that. There was a train derailment not too far, about 40 miles from where I am right now, a couple of years ago. And for a short period of time, they weren't sure what was on the train. That was still being investigated. They came very close and doing the plume analysis of where the train derailed and what could have potentially been on it. It would have cleared out several neighborhoods very quickly. And when they knock on your door with a train derailment, they go, you have 5 minutes, get in your car and go. And go north, go south, whatever direction it is. So keep that in mind. Maybe you need something, even if your plan is we're just going to sleep in the van. That's okay, but have a plan. Safety. I want to jump around safety and security a little bit differently, but safety. Do you have a first aid kit? Do you know where your first aid kit is? In your first aid kit, can you handle larger traumas? A Band-Aid is great for a little cut. Do you have the bandages that you would need for a bigger cut? Do you have a suture kit? Anybody can give stitches. Now, you can suck at it. They can look terrible, but just about anybody can close a wound if it needs to be closed. You have to have the equipment, though, to be able to do it. Make sure you have a smart first aid kit, and with the old rule of 2 is 1 and 1 is none, have 2 of them. First aid kits are relatively cheap, and they're worth their weight in gold. Toilet paper. I mean, there's just the basic things. Do you have some of these basic necessities? You need to think about it. I know I'm going very quickly here, but I'm going over a lot of things. Security. Now, security can mean a lot of different things, but there is an undeniable part of prepping that says, if I'm going to have these things to protect my family from a natural disaster, there is a security component of that that is unavoidable and undeniable. Any reasonable prepper must be armed or live in a fortress. Doesn't mean you have to be a crazy gun nut. You don't. I'd recommend a Ruger 10/22. I've got another video on this. It goes all over the place. But if you are going to protect your family from natural disasters, you might find yourself in a scenario where you have to protect your family from other things as well. Be prepared for that. Again, that kind of sucks to think about, and that's not really where the direction that you're really headed in. With a lot of your prepping should really focus on more community-oriented prepping, but it's there. Be aware of it. You don't have to live and breathe it, but understand. Well, again, these kind of jumping around a little bit. Do you have a plan? And not just do you have a plan in your head. Well, if this happened, I'd do this. Do you have a paper plan? Do you have several copies of it? Does it have the names of the medicines that you're on? Does it have the names of your doctors or your pediatricians? Does it have your social security numbers, your driver's license numbers, everybody's phone number in your family? I have a cell phone now. I have dozens and dozens of phone numbers in my cell phone. I barely remember my own phone number. You're going to need these. Make sure you have them on paper. Electronic devices will fail. I say that with a certain amount of irony, given that this is on the internet. Communications. There are lots of very cool things out there. I particularly like amateur radio. It doesn't have to be amateur radio. Do you have a battery-operated radio so that when the power is down, you can at least pick up an AM radio station and get some news? Do you have the little family radio service, FRS, GMRS radios that you and your family can communicate with each other, say up to a few blocks away? These are things you need to think about. There are crank radios out there that are just fantastic. They're not that expensive. And in the event that power's out, and when power goes out, information stops. In the event of a very large power outage, consider that. Have something.